One of the most ridiculous questions that can ever be asked is, are you pro-choice? That's obviously a hot button issue in our culture today, but the question itself is pretty ridiculous because as we go through this treatise on human acts, and in question 13 of Prima Secunda, we talk about of choice, which is an act of the will with regards to the means. Choice is merely a part of a human act. So of course, we all make choices, but the issue is not are you pro-choice or not. Choice is just a fact, and it has to do with what we do on a daily basis, and so there's really no issue on whether you're for it or against it. It's just a fact that that's part of who we are. And so really you have to dig a little bit deeper and say, well, what are you choosing, and how is that choice related to the will, the intellect, and the object which you are choosing about? And so that's what we're talking about in this 13th question of Prima Secunda as we continue this treatise on human acts. And of course, it's a big word, a very important word. And so I think it's important that we get to the bottom of this and really kind of analyze it, as St. Thomas Aquinas is so good at doing. So Article 1 is whether choice is an act of the will or of the reason. So of course, the will is an intellectual appetite. It has to do with going towards something and pursuing the good in something, whereas the reason has to do with intellect. It has to do with apprehension, where it is able to apprehend something, the true, right? What it is, the universal true in something, as opposed to the universal good, which would be the object of the will. So Thomas says the word choice implies something belonging to the reason or intellect and something belonging to the will. Okay, so right now, he hasn't really answered the question. He's saying it's kind of both. It's intellect and it's also will, which is really interesting. He said, for the philosopher says that choice is either intellect influenced by appetite or appetite influenced by intellect. All right. Now, whenever two things concur to make one of them is formal in regard to the other. So now the issue is, well, which one is formal, which one is material, and that's what he's going to get here. For just as we say that an animal is composed of a soul and a body, and that it is neither a mere body nor a mere soul, but both, so it is with choice. All right, so he's saying, yeah, there's something interesting about choice. It's intellect and it's will. But then he will finally make a determination here. He says, now we observe as regards the acts of the soul that an act belonging essentially to some power or habit receives a form or species from a higher power or habit according as an inferior is ordained by a superior. So now he's putting it kind of in a hierarchy, right? For if a man were to perform an act of fortitude for love of God, the act is materially an act of fortitude, but formally an act of charity. All right, so the fortitude is motivated by the charity, and that's what he's going to get at now with his relationship to intellect and will with regard to choice. Now it is evident that in a sense reason precedes the will and ordains its act, insofar as the will tends to its object according to the order of reason, since the apprehensive power presents the object to the appetite. So let's just say somebody wants to graduate from high school, and they have an intellectual desire to do that. Well, first of all, they have to, through the intellect, apprehend what it is that they're desiring in the first place, right? They have to know that what it is that they want to graduate. So that's an act of the intellect. The desire or the pursuit of it is an act of the will. Accordingly, that act whereby the will tends to something proposed to it as being good, through being ordained to the end by the reason, is materially an act of the will, but formally an act of the reason. Now, in such like matters, the substance of the act is as the matter in comparison to the order imposed by the higher power. Wherefore, choice is substantially not an act of the reason, but of the will. For choice is accomplished in a certain movement of the soul towards the good which is chosen. Consequently, it is evident that it is an act of the appetitive power. Okay, so ultimately, it's an act of the will, but the will being influenced by the reason through apprehension of what it is that it's desiring in the first place, right? Article 2, whether choice is to be found in irrational animals. This is kind of interesting. Since choice is the taking of one thing in preference to another, it must of necessity be in respect of several things that can be chosen. Consequently, in those things which are altogether determinate to one, there is no place for choice. Now, the difference between the sensitive appetite and the will is that the sensitive appetite is determinate to one particular thing, according to the order of nature, whereas the will, although determinate to one thing in general, that is the good, according to the order of nature, it is nevertheless indeterminate in respect of particular goods. So now we get back to this whole universal good, particular good. The universal good is determined, all right? We all want to be happy. We all want the good. But then on the way to that happiness, we have choices. But the irrational animals don't, okay? They just respond to the sensible good, and it's determined. Consequently, choice belongs properly to the will and not to the sensitive appetite, which all irrational animals have, wherefore irrational animals are not competent to choose. Article 3, whether choice is only of the means or sometimes also of the end. Okay, do we choose only things on the way to the end, or are we choosing the end? He says choice results from the decision or judgment, which is, as it were, the conclusion of a practical syllogism. Okay? Hence, that which is the conclusion of a practical syllogism is the matter of choice. Now, in practical things, the end stands in the position of a principle, not of a conclusion, whereas the end, as such, is not a matter of choice. Okay, so he's saying, no, choice has to do with the means. It's not the end, right? But just as in speculative knowledge, nothing hinders the principle of one demonstration or of one science from being the conclusion of another demonstration or science. Now he seems to be equivocating a little bit. While the first indemonstrable principle cannot be the conclusion of any demonstration or science, so too that which is the end in one operation may be ordained to something as an end. And in this way, it is a matter of choice. Thus, in the work of the physician, okay, here's his example again, health is the end, wherefore it is not a matter of choice for a physician, but a matter of principle. Okay, so to make his patients healthy, that's a matter of principle. Now, the health of the body is ordained to the good of the soul. Consequently, with one who has the charge of the soul's health or sickness may be a matter of choice. All right, so ultimately, choice has to do with the intermediate things on the way to the final end. But I think what Thomas is saying here is that they're all really related to each other. There's a relation between these that is somewhat kind of hard to differentiate between them. Whether choice is of those things only that are done by us. Just as intention regards the end, so does choice regard the means. Now, the end is either an action or a thing, and when the end is a thing, some human action must intervene, either insofar as man produces the thing which is the end, as the physician produces health, wherefore the production of health is said to be the end of the physician, or insofar as man, in some fashion, uses or enjoys the thing which is the end. Thus, for the miser, money or the possession of money is the end. The same is to be said of the means, for the means must be either an action or a thing with some action intervening, whereby man either makes the thing which is the means or puts it to some use, and thus it is that choice is always in regard to human acts. Okay, so he's saying, yeah, there's always going to be a relation to choice to human acts, all right? So that makes sense. Article 5, whether choice is only of possible things. Okay, can you choose impossible things? Would that make sense? Our choice is always concerned with our actions. Now, whatever is done by us is possible to us, wherefore we must say that choice is only of possible things. Can I choose to become, a lizard? Well, no, it's not possible, so it would be a silly thing to choose because it's not possible. Moreover, the reason for choosing a thing is that it conduces to an end. But what is impossible cannot conduce to an end. A sign of this is that when men in taking counsel together come to something that is impossible to them, they depart as being unable to proceed with the business. Wherefore, an end cannot be possible unless the means be possible. Now, no one is moved to the impossible. Consequently, no one would tend to the end save for the fact that the means appear to be possible, or therefore it is impossible. The impossible is not the object of choice. Okay, you can't choose something that's impossible. Article 6, final article, whether man chooses of necessity or freely. He says man does not choose of necessity. And this is because that which is possible not to be is not of necessity. Now, the reason why it is possible not to choose or to choose may be gathered from a twofold power in man. For man can will and not will, act and not act. Again, he can will this or that and do this or that. The reason of this is seated in the very power of the reason. For the will can tend to whatever the reason can apprehend as good. All right, we're going back to that first article there. Yeah, the reason apprehends something, and then the will says, okay, that's good, I'm going to pursue it, right? Now, the reason can apprehend as good not only this, to will or to act, but also not to will or not to act. Again, in all particular goods, the reason can consider an aspect of some good and lack of some good, which has the aspect of evil. And in this respect, it can apprehend any single one of such goods as to be chosen or to be avoided. The perfect good alone, which is happiness, cannot be apprehended by the reason of an evil or as lacking in any way. Consequently, man wills happiness of necessity, nor can he will not to be happy or to be unhappy. Now, since choice is not the end, but the means, it is not the perfect good, which is happiness, but of other particular goods. Therefore, man chooses not of necessity, but freely. Okay, so we are drawn to the ultimate good, happiness, beatitude, God, with a determinism. We can't choose not to do that, right? But the means are not of necessity. And that's why people can sin, because they're choosing things freely and not of necessity that are not really conducive to their final end, but God allows us to do this because he gave us free will. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that. This is a very important topic, choice in our culture today, because there's a lot of talk about choice and pro-choice and anti-choice and that kind of stuff. So hope you enjoyed it. Thanks. We'll be on with question number 14 of the Prima Secunda tomorrow. St. Thomas Aquinas, pray for us. God bless you.